Um, I'm just going to scroll through it as it exists now. Let me just refresh it so that nobody has a cow. And I'm just going to go and try and take them more or less in the order of the upvotes and work my way down. So let's have a look here. Okay, there we go. All right, so marching down the list, 3, 4, 3s and 4s and 5. All right, I'll do the 5s and then I'll do the 4s and we'll figure it out what we're going to do after that. All right, so sorry about the delay. Here we go. Dave Olson, top fan Dave Olson, with a little diamond next to him, which is awesome and cool. So it looks like the rise of Skywalker will finally kill off Star Wars. Should it kill off Hollywood as well? With the advent of digital technology, filmmaking should be much, much cheaper, and yet all we get are movies where $50 million is considered low budget. Yes. For those of you who have not followed the Star Wars catastrophe, I actually gave a speech today in Orange County, and I said I have come to believe, after watching for the last year and a half, 2 years, very, very closely, I've come to believe that the culture war is that the culture war has been won, and we win it. It's not over. It's like midway. 6 months into the war, 7 months after the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, we sink 4 carriers in 6 minutes. Mortally wounded them in 6 minutes. And that was the end of the war. Rather, that was the victory. From that point on, Japan really had no chance to win. They didn't have much of a chance before that, but from that point on, it was just a matter of time. But all the casualties and all the fighting came after Midway. So we're still going to have things get worse before they get better. But I'm convinced that that the left is lost this thing. And the reason I become convinced of this, and it ties into your question here, Dave, is because people's biology cannot be changed. I'm not going to get into this case that I've made 100 times, but if young people were going into the world of movies and computer games so that they could, write petitions and send strongly worded letters and get on a bus or a train or something, I'd say we're cooked. But the reason that the left has followed this generation into movies and video games is because when they get into movies and video games, what they want to see is they want to see action and guns and drive fast and all of that stuff. And that does not seem to be something that you could beat out of them. So having looked at what they did with Star Wars and how the feminists have made their lead character, it's funny to me, it's actually really quite ironic that that feminists create, without question, the worst female characters that I've ever seen. And they make them the worst female characters I've ever seen because they give them all the power at front, up immediately. They know how to do everything better than anybody else, and nobody cares. You walk in, you're already superhero. Yeah, you walk in, you've just never seen a lightsaber before, and now you defeat the son, basically the ideological son of Darth Vader. You do it in one movie, and we're supposed to be interested for 2 more movies. We already know you kicked his ass. You kicked his ass in the first one. Where do you go from there? So they do this again and again and again and again and again. They just give them all this power because the idea for these radical feminists now, I'm not talking about women filmmakers, I'm talking about these feminists that have been making movies for the last 2 or 3 years, or they're influencing movies. They simply make the most boring characters. Captain Marvel, who gives a damn? She immediately perfect and does everything right, great. As somebody pointed out, Wonder Woman went to a different tack and actually had Wonder Woman sad and hurt and lose things. A much, much, much better movie. But as a general rule, they can't do it. So they've basically turned Star Wars into mush. And this last movie, The Last Jedi, pretty much destroyed Star Wars. And everybody was wondering whether or not they could pull out a hat trick of some kind, some magic trick, and save it in the last of the third episode of the third trilogy. And then finally the trailer was released and everybody just went, oh, good God, this is going to be, it's going to bomb. It's going to tank. And I'm glad it's going to tank. I'll get to the $50 million question, the $50 million movie thing in a second here, Dave, because I think this is monumental. There is in the culture right now, and this is my wheelhouse, I would say. I watch a lot of pop culture stuff. There, I've spoken before about how angry this generally non-political generation is about all of this stuff, but there's something beyond that now, and I'm seeing it everywhere. I'm really sensing it everywhere, and that is a sense of a sense of desolation, like a moral desolation, a hopelessness. This may seem trivial to people who don't swim in the pop culture. But because the left has gone in and destroyed Star Wars and they've destroyed Star Trek, and they haven't just made bad stuff, they've made stuff that undid the good stuff. And because they've destroyed Terminator and they've destroyed Ghostbusters and they've destroyed everything, they've just destroyed it. Dave Big Booty wants to know how many big bat movies I could make for $50 million. I could make 100 of them, Dave. And what I'm finding everywhere is that all of these people that have been had fandom fandom YouTube channels and stuff for film, every single one of them, every one of them is depressed. They used to be angry, now they're angry and depressed. The attitude now, as Dave pointed out in his question, is not whether or not this final series this final episode is going to be good or bad. All across the board, it's just, I don't care. I just don't care anymore. I don't care. I don't care if it's good or bad. It's dead to me now. And you cannot destroy the mythology of a people. You can try, but you can't. There's a guy out there. It's a family show, so I'm not going to mention his name. Somebody will probably type it up in the comments section here. But he basically came up with laws of canon. Canon is when you have a giant fan universe. You have let's say you've got the Star Trek universe, and you've got millions of fans, and everybody's writing stuff and filming stuff, and so everybody's out there doing things. The question becomes, what is official? What's canonical? What is part of the ongoing story of this particular universe? And traditionally, canon has been determined by being released by the studios. So you can't get away from the fact that The Last Jedi destroyed Star Wars, Luke Skywalker. You can't get away from it. It's canon. It happened. But the level of disgust now is so high that I'm starting to see something that I've been thinking about for quite a long time. And this is an interesting political question as well. I think, yes, John Pershing got it right. I think that canon should be determined by the fans. There have been fan-made movies. Star Trek and Axar is one of the greatest, and Star Trek Continues. They're just superb, excellent. They should be canonical, and a lot of the stuff that the studio puts out should simply be fan fiction. And this is exactly what this guy was talking about. He had originally had 3 rules of canon. Now he's got 5. But basically he said, whoever the original creator is, that person always dictates canon. And the Star Wars movies were, George Lucas had supplied an outline for the final 3 movies, and they just totally trashed it. So they just chucked it. And so what he's saying is, no, you don't get to do that. And he had a bunch of other rules, but the thing that's interesting to me here is where do property rights and communal rights begin? John Galt just said he just started watching Star Trek Continues. That is magnificently done. And this guy who was talking about canon said that he thought that Star Trek Continues was essentially Star Trek, the original series. It was the 4th season of the original series. I thought so too. There were 1 or 2 episodes in there were fantastic, well written, and absolutely canonical. And I know this is sounds very esoteric for some people, but it's actually extremely important. It's very, very important. Um, there is a sense now that there is so much anger at the left for having not just made bad movies, but destroyed the mythology that people lived by. And they don't look at their Luke Skywalker action figures that they grew up with the same way anymore because of what the left has done to them. So they're not only disgusted and angry at the left, they're depressed, and there's a sense of just cynical kind of, well, whatever, and it's all across the board. They ruined Terminator, Ghostbusters. They ruined, virtually all of the Marvel comics. They ruined Star Trek. They ruined Star Wars. They ruined everything they touched. They ruined. They ruined Predator. They just shoving their politics into everything. So this entire pop culture is missing something now. It's like somebody had come along to the ancient Greeks and basically stolen away all of their stories of Theseus and Perseus and Hercules, or Heracles, I guess, for the Greeks, and all. It's like it's gone, and there's nothing replacing it. And people are not just sad; they're lost. I can feel it. They're lost. They are in a state of despair because the things that they believed in have been undone. We talk about the Greeks and mythology and how amazing Greek mythology is. Okay. Well, Greeks passed on their mythology by sitting around and telling stories. The story of Perseus and Andromeda, they would tell that story. And since we live in the culture we live in, the only way for us to tell stories to each other, given the fact that there's 300 million of us instead of 30 of us in a village, is through film. And this common cultural heritage is called the pop culture. And this is where everything turns. This is where people make their political decisions based on what lessons they learn about the culture. So it's a tremendous opportunity, which I plan to exploit. Nothing is new. Everything is a reboot. The Terminator reboot that just came out and lost $100 million did exactly what The Last Jedi did. It didn't just make a bad Terminator movie. It made a movie where John Connor played computer graphic John Connor, and Sarah Connor are on the beach, and a Terminator appears and just shoots him dead. And now John Connor is no longer the leader of the resistance in the future. It turns out it's a Mexican girl. It wasn't this white kid who we've been growing up with, seen him age, followed him around for 3 or 4 movies. It's not this white male that's going to lead the resistance against these Terminators. That's all wrong. No. We stroke of the pen. It's disappeared. Now it's going to be a Mexican woman, young Mexican woman, who's going to be the leader of the resistance. And they just did it because they can. They did it because they wanted to make money off of the Terminator name, and they did it because they want to rewrite the history of our culture and write male heroes out of it and female heroes into it. And then they continue to do this to the fans. And when the fans complain about it, they call them racist. And this is the most important thing, folks. I've watched now for 2 years people complaining about what they've done to Star Wars, Star Trek, complaining to what they did to James Bond, complaining about what they did. And this is really important. The left deals with these complaints by calling these people racists. And what's really important about that is that means that this entire millennial generation, at least the influencers of it in the pop culture, are finally getting the experience that conservatives have had to deal with for 40 years, and especially the last 10 or 15 years. And that is, you ask a legitimate question, and the only response that you get from the left is you're a racist. I've seen it on the faces of these people who have millions of followers. I've seen the look on their face when they say, I tried to point this out, and they called me a racist or a misogynist, and they got the same look I do when they call me those things. And this is enormously important. Enormously important. So I think the answer to this is to go out and make new content about new characters and boldly break every one of these cultural taboos, but not make them for the purpose of that. Just kind of do it in on the journey. So now to your $50 million question about $50 million movie being a low budget movie. The reason that this happens is because Hollywood's accounting system has had almost a century to perfect the art of stealing and cheating. If I've said this many times before, if the accounting practices used by Hollywood were to be used in any other business, the people doing the bookkeeping would be in jail. Ed Norton, as I've said before, I saw his eyes when a studio executive admitted to Peter Guber that the DVD sales for Fight Club were doing well. He turned and was, oh, really? Because Ed Norton wasn't getting a check. And the executive backed up, oh, we have to cross-collateralize this and losses over here and so on. So it's all just a lie. So to answer your question, Dave, the reason that a low-budget movie costs $50 million is because Hollywood is so good at masking profits that anybody who's ever taken a percentage of the back end ownership position, points we call it, those people have been burned for so long that it's actually kind of a joke now. It actually generates a laugh. If you were to go to an actor and say, look, I know you get $5 million for a movie, but this is a really good story and it's a really good part and it's a really important topic, and we could pay you scale, which I forget, I don't know, is it $800 a day or something like that? They have to get paid scale because otherwise the union jumps on them, but Tom Cruise could agree to do a movie for $800 a day or whatever union scale is. It's his decision. But when you try to make a movie on a lower budget, there's a lot of this kind of promising of back-end profits. And it has been so subverted by these lying, miserable swine that that if you were to say to somebody now, we'd like you to work for this, it's a low budget, so we'd like you to take very little money up front, but we can give you points on the back end, give you percentage on the back end. Nowadays, it'll elicit an open laugh. Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll take some points. Absolutely. Probably the most egregious example is, I forget the exact numbers, but it's similar to this. Lord of the Rings, the three movies together made in excess of $4 billion. And the estate of J.R.R. Tolkien had made a deal where they had agreed to net profit and not gross profit. They didn't get a share of the box office. They got a percentage of what was left after Hollywood had taken their accounting thing on it. And somewhere in the period where these three films made $4 billion, I think the estate of Tolkien had received something like $200,000 in payment or something like that. That's it. I know you got 5% of the back end, but these things were very expensive to make and they just barely broke even. Sorry. It's just plain lying. The advantage about being a conservative out here trying to make movies and work with conservative actors is, just to take my example, because it's an example I know better than other people's. If I were to go to certain conservative actors and ask them to do this, I would get a different response than they would give to somebody from over the hill, because over the course of 10 years of video and 15 years, I guess 16 years of writing, I've, through some miracle, managed to establish some kind of credibility and some kind of integrity. And if I said to somebody, look, I cannot promise you that this film's going to make a movie, that this film's going to make money. Nobody can promise you that. What I will promise you is this: you will get to see the same books that we do. If I get 10% of the movie and you get 1%, then you're going to get to see how much money I make and how much money you make, and we're either going to go up or we're going to sink together. But it's going to be done honestly and openly. Then you could get people who would be willing to give a couple days with the possibility of maybe making some money on the back end. So now we get to the other thing that Dave was talking about, and that is the availability of digital production to completely change the landscape. That machinima I ran earlier, that little 4-minute test on prospectors, if I tried to do that in 3D Studio 5 years ago, 10 certainly 10 years ago, that little test project would have been $100,000. And it would have taken weeks of rendering time. And I shot it all in 45 minutes. So yes, the tools are out there. The camera that I shoot Bill Whittle now on, I know nobody will believe this, but it's actually a Blackmagic 4K digital camera. And given the right lighting situation, I can't light that set because I've got a reflective TV screen behind me, and I'm going to be doing something about that as soon as I can. But that camera actually is capable of shooting feature films. I think Lord of the Rings was shot on not Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit was shot on this Blackmagic camera, and it's about $1,500. Not 15,000 or 15 million. It's about $1,500, and so you could easily walk out and do a no effects, you know, just a story about a guy in an apartment kind of thing. You could shoot that movie for probably 200 grand, I would say. And then but the effects become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. I've seen visual effects done by guys who have YouTube channels that are just mind-boggling. They're absolutely astonishing, and so the opportunity is there. Now, what's the next step now, Dave, is to have a couple of examples of people who did all of the things that I was just talking about and ended up making a ton of money for somebody. That's what investors are going to want to see. They're going to want to see. They're going to want to see somebody like me say, I can go out there and make a $50 million movie for $1 million or $1.5 million. And then, number one, you're going to have to deliver on that promise. It's going to have to look like a $50 million movie. It can't look like a cheap movie because otherwise you lose the argument and the money. But if you can come back with a good product, that's the first step. And then if you can sell that product and make $50 million on a film that costs $1 million, if you can do that once, then money will come looking for you. And then you can basically start a little studio, and this is still my long-term goals, and this is how you can basically get it done. But no one's going to do it by making the 7th installment of the Predator films featuring pick a victim, transgendered athletes, let's say. The people want new content. People want new movies. They're sick and tired of these reboots, and they're especially sick now because these reboots have not only not satisfied their need for new stuff, but it's actually ruined things. I remember when Solo tanked a couple year and a half ago, I guess. It was the first Star Wars movie to actually fail. And the executives were saying, we're putting out too much product. That's what it is. We're putting out one Star Wars movie every 6 months, and that's just too much for people to process. And I was just, if you made good Star Wars movies, you could put one out a month, and you would be packing theaters. If you had one a month, are you kidding? That was good. You would continue to build audience. It's got nothing to do with the frequency. It's got to do with the fact that you don't respect the material, and you have decided that politics is more important than what these universes are and why they became popular in the first place. And ultimately, you're one of those people that is one of those people that will say, why don't we just strangle this goose that keeps laying this golden eggs? Yes, I know it makes a golden egg every single day, but if we just kill it and cut it open, we probably get 5 or 6 golden eggs right now. And that's what they do. They have destroyed franchises. They're gone. Star Wars as a franchise is over. Star Trek is over unless an Axar can come back strong, and I got a lot of chips riding on an Axar. If an Axar comes back looking as good as the pilot trailer does, or not the trailer, but the prelude episode, if they can make a whole series of episodes that are 15 minutes long that are that good, then that will be a success, and then that success will find a way to get audience, and if it finds audience, it'll get some money back. Martin Archer just linked to a film called 405, the movie. It's something I saw, God, it's at least 10 years old now. And it's about a 405 freeway when somebody has to land a jumbo jet on the freeway. And it was done at least 10 years ago, maybe more. And when I saw it, I said, this is fantastic. These effects are done so well that I really genuinely believe that's what I'm watching. We did a show about the robot soldier not too long ago. The video effects there were done by a small company. It's the best CG I've ever seen. It's the best CG and compositing I've ever seen. And so the tools are out there. The problem is getting people together, and the problem is convincing people with money to put up a little bit of money. But it's almost like, okay, so we're going to have to go out there and scratch around in the dirt and do it ourselves, and do it on a small scale, and then show that it works, and then take it from there. So that's kind of the long-term goal that I've been pursuing pretty much the whole time here. So that's that, Dave. Let's see what else we got here.